Lewis, thank you so much for joining me today. I was fascinated when I saw the Netflix documentary that you did called The Psychopath Life Coach. So your kind of story was bad guy, like really, really bad guy, turned very good and very successful, which I'm fascinated by. You were diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which essentially means at some point someone thought that you were a psychopath. And I really wanted to speak to you because sadly the abuse that you suffered when you were growing up and that you were a victim of violence inflicted on you from one of your parents, I thought that was quite striking. Could you tell me where things started off for you in relation to you developing your sense of self when you were young and being a victim of that violence?
Yeah, I mean, I never really saw myself as a victim. That's an interesting thing because it was just my norm. It was my reality. I didn't have anything to compare it to. So that's part of the problem because you form this identity with no perspective of other identities that you could adopt. So, I was exposed to this sort of toxic environment, which again, I wasn't aware it was toxic. I just thought that's family dynamic. My dad was an alcoholic. He would put me down a lot with his words. That was probably the most painful. The violence was probably quite rare in comparison to the things he would say and the sort of behaviour towards me. Just have general disgust towards me sometimes, just in the way that he looked at me and things like that. I think that was probably the most difficult to deal with. But my mum was also emotionally disconnected because I believe she does have emotion, but she just never really learnt to nurture them because she came from a household that didn't have provided to her as well. In her later years and our relationship now, it's starting to come out a bit more, which is interesting. So I think she didn't have the dynamic to be able to express herself, but her dad, my granddad, was in the military, so he was this very strict man and you don't speak unless you're spoken to, and there was no hugs or kisses or I love yous in her household. There was no real parenting courses back then, there is now. So I think it's a generational transition from what you've experienced to what you then pass forward. So my dad had a bad relationship with his father. He never told me the details, but he said he didn't like him. He said family are people. That's what he said.
Family are people?
Family are just people. That's what I said. I said, what do you think about family? He said, well, they're just people.
They're just people?
Yeah, very, very going into psychopaths or whatever, he's very, I would say he is one. Yeah, was one. I'm not sure. Who knows? I didn't really get to know him that well. But very, very emotionally disconnected. Never saw any emotion from him other than anger. And he said some very ruthless things. I once asked him, what do you think happens when people die? He said, when you're dead, you're dead. It's just so matter of fact about everything. He'd say some really harmful things that, again, he probably didn't really think of much at the time, but he'd say things like, why can't you be funny like your brother, or your brother's the intelligent one, and things like that. And he might say it once, but you hold on to that, and it creates this meaning of who you are and how you sit in the world, or how I thought I was and how I sat in the world. And I don't know if that was what caused it, but also I was a naughty kid. Who knows if I was acting out? I was so young to really determine what was the sort of triggering point of this. Was it the naughty kid that then caused that reaction in my dad, or was the reaction my dad caused me to be the naughty kid, or was it a combination of the both? But I was a naughty child from a very young age. From nursery, I was disruptive, couldn't control me. I was, I was almost expelled from primary school. It's almost impossible to do. No one's ever really done that, I don't think. And then I was expelled from school. So I was naughty as a child, naturally, I think. And then through this... That's
a very interesting point, that you are saying you were naughty as a child naturally rather than saying you were carrying out bad behaviours as a child.
Yeah, as far as I can remember, I can just always remember just be mischievous, or I'm going to act out, or I'm feeling pain, so I'm going to go and do this. It was just, from what I can remember, obviously it was a long time ago, it's hard to really remember those days because I'm talking about, from the ages of, say, 5 years old or whatever. It did feel like who I was. So yeah. I thought that's who I was. And as I grew up, these things compounded together, and I formed an identity of being naughty, which then evolved into being bad, which then in my teenage years, it became more antisocial, and it fell into criminality and drugs and alcohol and stealing and smashing windows and lighting fires. And then it got reinforced by the council by giving me an ASBO and getting expelled from school, and the parents saying, you really are, bad, and we're going to, ring fence you from the family, as I said in the documentary, because you're harming the family. Everyone from the police to everyone else in between told me I was bad. So, and it kind of made sense. So I thought I was. So that was my identity, bad. unlovable as well. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you feel bad, you do bad things. And when you do bad things, you feel bad. And then when you feel bad, you do bad things again.
Yeah.
It's hard to sort of get yourself out of that spiral, I guess. And you don't think there is a way out because it's who I was. And if it's who you are, it's not changeable. But that was the limited fixed mindset, obviously, I had at the time. And having the awareness that that wasn't me and that I had the ability to adopt a different identity was what was able to, which was one of the fundamental shifts that that enabled me to grow into a different person.
When you were excluded from the family, what was that like for you?
I think I bottled it up at the time. It was only later on when I had a relationship with a girl, my first ever relationship, and I fell in love for the first time.
How old were you?
17. I was with her for a year until I was 18. I do actually remember it vividly. So we had an argument. I got drunk. She told me she cheated on me, but in a really spiteful way. Like, she looked at me and said, "I cheated on you." And I'm sure you've heard the expression "see red." All right, I saw red, but also had this huge flash of, when you see in movies, like you're just about to die and your life flashes before you. That happened, but I felt all the pain from my life just hit me in one hit. I felt the rejection from her, because immediately I knew, right, this is over, because she's done that. And it confirmed, I am unlovable and I am bad. I thought I was kind of going to be all right now. She gave me a little glimpse of hope. She filled that void temporarily that I felt, that, I'm this bad, unlovable kid that no one wants. But you love me, so maybe I'm okay. But then that got ripped away. But then that kind of also confirmed what I'd felt at home. And that kind of hit me, and it triggered this sequence of feelings that I'd kind of not felt, and I just felt loss. I think loss was probably the best word to describe it. Loss of my girlfriend, loss of my family, loss of that hope. And following part of that story is quite dramatic, where I smashed her kitchen and pulled out a knife and slit my throat and got sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Went absolutely crazy. Was screaming, saying "let me die." I was trying to fight the paramedics, and interestingly, that wasn't even the thing that got me diagnosed with anything. Because I don't know why, but the next morning they put me in a padded room. It's absolutely insane. Arrested me, sectioned me under the Mental Health Act, and put me in a padded room. Then the next morning just said, have you got anyone that can come pick you up?
No, it's just like these things never cease to surprise me.
And then I got in the car with my mum, and she just drove home and didn't say a word.
Just like normal, carry on like normal.
Yeah, well, she probably just thought my brain can't process that, so. It just have to be nothing. But I can't remember what even was the initial question that you said there. But how did it feel when I was sort of ring fenced by the family? And I think, it didn't really hit me until that point. And then it all came. And then that was the real turning point of my life, where I just went off the rails at that point.
Your mom, it sounds like she didn't have the ability to communicate with you from an emotional level. Mm-hmm. Because actually, if a mom was in touch with her own emotions, she would have sat you down and, said, look, I love you very much. I'm so concerned. Like, what can we do to help you change? Like, we love you, but your behavior is horrendous and not acceptable. And obviously you said your mom really came from an upbringing where she didn't receive love and care. But what do you think you needed from her at that point, where you've just been sectioned, you've been put in a padded room, you were clearly very broken and struggling. Yeah. What would have helped? What did you need to hear from her at that point?
It's not like I felt like I needed anything. I wasn't in victim mode at that point. I know I was in denial mode. So I even thought I think the reason why they let me go is because I was saying, oh my God, I was just so drunk last night. What the fuck did I do? And that's what they thought. They thought this young guy just had his first breakup and he's just done something stupid and was just on his way.
And they don't have the resources or really know how to really care for people who are in that situation.
And to be honest, I thought the same. So I didn't think, I'm struggling with some issues, because all my friends were kind of similar. And so to me, it was just crazy drunken night where I did something stupid again, So it's not like I thought, I need someone to talk to or whatever. To answer your question, what I needed was that many, many years before. I needed someone to sit me down and say, I love you and what's up and why are you behaving like this, and allow me to understand myself, because I didn't, and I was acting on autopilot, reacting this whole time with no awareness whatsoever. It took me decades to figure out why I was doing all these things. I had no idea that I had trauma with my dad or that he made me feel these certain ways. I was just absorbing it subconsciously, creating an identity and reacting, and then playing out this program without any idea of what was going on.
The most sinister thing I saw from your social media from the past was your acting skills, which was phenomenal. It was like you were showing like you were really upset, distressed, and then all of a sudden like complete dead eyes and like psychopath.
I said, only joking.
Yeah, so sinister to watch. And I guess when someone sees that, they're like, oh my God, who am I dealing with here and what is this person capable of? So I'm just kind of curious about when you look back on when you made that clip. Well, first of all, how old were you when you made that clip?
20.
Okay. And when you look back at that point in your life, were you able to do that? Were you able to mimic certain emotions and like be quite persuasive so that you could manipulate people easily?
Yeah. I don't deny, all these traits. The whole thing about the whole Psychopath life coach is I don't confirm or deny it. I think it's the opening line. I don't confirm or deny it purely because I don't really understand enough about it to be able to put myself into that box. You probably understand more than me. I'd be really interested to hear your view on it, and to give you. I'm really happy for you to share that soon. But 100%, I hold my hands up and I say like a lot of those traits I have, and I have always had. And still have. I was even watching one of your YouTube videos recently. You're narcissist nice guy. I must admit, I'm most of those. Not in a conscious or harmful way, but in an inherent way, I would say, or a learned behaviour way. I don't know. Yeah, nature or nurture is always going to be the question. Where this came from, I don't know.
Probably pre-verbal memories.
What is that?
Pre-verbal memories is when we're taking in a lot of information and we can't even speak, so we're not holding those memories, but we hold those memories in our body.
Gotcha.
We hold them in our belief system. So, for example, your dad, just being so verbally abusive towards you, I can only imagine what he was like when you were still a baby. Memories that you don't currently hold consciously, but they were within you. And your mom not being emotionally responsive, you were probably left to cry and be alone. And, all of this stuff really traumatizes us as humans. I think there's always that interesting nature-nurture debate when it comes to people being labeled as psychopaths. But I think because you're able to tell such a clear story of trauma, it's quite obvious to me as a psychologist, this is like trauma, and also it's a big thing to be labeled as a personality disorder, because that is implying that someone's not really capable of change. And
and it's a disorder, which is quite a unfair term in itself, because it's diverse, isn't it? We talk a lot about neurodiversity now. This is one that doesn't have as much spotlight on it. You're doing a good job of raising some awareness around it, but I think it's probably still being spoken about from a raising awareness of the negative impacts that these people can cause. But actually, not everybody that has those traits, symptoms, attributes, characteristics, skills, whatever you want to call them, does it to harm or hurt. So, for example, when I was watching your Narcissist Nice Guy video, all the traits that you said made sense, but then when I read in the comments, I'm hearing these devastating stories of these women that have been, completely abused by partners and left to rot after they've been given this fantasy. But that's not always the case, right? There can be people that display those traits but never hurt anybody. Yeah,
I think it's such a good point, Lewis, because certain diagnostic labels such as autism or ADHD, the stigma is very different. Whereas if we saw someone who has narcissism as a result of trauma, it is a result of trauma or a type of neurodiversity, and that is completely not the person's fault, as long as the person is, kind of willing to have insight and is willing to control their behaviors. I think that we need to have a lot of empathy for people who are narcissists, because otherwise, if anyone learns that someone is supposed to be a narcissist, people distance themselves and then those people get abandoned, and that's like triggering the person's greatest fear. And a good friend of mine has very high traits of narcissism, and I see the suffering that he goes through. And although he is not capable of being the most loving, compassionate, consistent person, and he shuts people out when he's in pain, he does all these things, but I see someone who's suffering, and it would make me a very unpleasant person to not have empathy for that. It doesn't mean he's going to always be the best person towards me, but when you know someone's story, I think you have to have compassion for that. And I think that's the thing about people who are given these labels. It's like it's a label that carries so much stigma.
Yeah, but even that I would say is middle ground, because then you said something there, he may not always be so nice towards me, which still implies that he has this behavior that is not aligned with how it should be. So you could be a narcissist, a psychopath on that spectrum of some sort, and not display any negative behavior towards anybody. It just may be the way that you interact with people, the way you feel inside about yourself, just the way that your brain works, But it doesn't necessarily mean to say that you do those toxic things that harm people in any way.
Well, I think the thing here is the lack of empathy. So people's expectations are they expect compassion, they expect more empathy. So even if someone is doing absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever, the painful thing for people can be the experience of lack of empathy. And this is, to do with one person's standards and expectations compared to other person's behavior. And two people have responsibility in that dynamic, because if someone keeps putting themselves in a situation where an individual is causing them pain, they have a choice to walk away, even though some people might find it hard to exercise that choice.
Yeah, and I think in that scenario, it's important to have very, very strong communication and very strong awareness, because if this narcissist guy had more awareness around who he was, he would be able to not only not display the negative traits that might harm somebody, but also be able to try and give something as close to what the person wants to receive, even though they may not experience it in that way.
I think one thing I want to ask you about that was fascinating was that your partner, when asked, "Are you a psychopath?" doesn't say no.
No, yeah.
So tell me more about that. Why do you think
we have a very
no?
open relationship and conversation around not open relationship in that sense. We have a
monogamous relationship.
We lived in Bali for a few years, so people could have thought, hey, actually that could actually be a case. Like, I'm very open about the fact that I think I probably am actually on that spectrum of psychopathy, and I am a bit of a narcissist, and but I don't harm people with it, and I actually am very grateful for a lot of those traits, because they've helped me tremendously and helped me help a lot of people. I don't necessarily relate to people in the same way as others might, and I don't feel a lot of things in the same way others will. It's there, it's just a lot dimmer than most people's, but I understand it cognitively to the point where I can give it to you in the same way that you may want to receive it, but I might just not be experiencing it in the same way that you think I am. So, but I also take the time to understand what my wife needs and try and give it to her. So, I learn about the love languages, and I learn about these 5 different ways, and I make sure she gets all 5, even though I don't want to give them necessarily, or I feel them, and I need to experience love in the way that I experience love. So love to me isn't necessarily a warm fuzzy feeling like other people may get. It's more of a practicality, that sounds ruthless, but to be honest, it's more of I have to see it, I have to understand it, I have to know that you love me. I said to her when we first met, I said, just to let you know, if you really do like me, you're going to have to really show me, otherwise I won't be able to tell if you love me or not. And I remember that she got this severe anxiety, and she had a panic attack a few days into being with me. And it was because she wanted to tell me that she loved me. And that was the thing for me that was wow, that you've had this physiological reaction. Because
she might have been scared that you would leave her because you weren't necessarily showing her.
Possibly, yeah, who knows. But whatever happened, it was enough for me to go, wow, this girl was really into me. For example, Diana will make me a dinner. It will make me feel loved, because I will be like, you have done that for me, and I can see that, and that is something I can logically process. Whereas she could actually, which I can't understand, can somehow radiate love towards me, apparently. She doesn't feel like she has to do anything in order for me to feel loved. So that sometimes can cause a bit of conflict, because I'm a little bit like, well, you're not doing all these things, so I'm feeling a little bit empty here. Why not? Because she's like, well, I love you because of this, and well, I don't get it that way. So I think we learn about each other to the point where it makes sense. But she knows what I'm like, and it's never been a secret. I think the most problem with these narcissists that are hurting women is because they're unaware of what they're doing. They're acting selfishly, and they're covering it up. But if it's a part of you, whether that's nature or nurture or trauma or whatever, you're working on it, I think it's more important to communicate it. And at least the partner knows where they stand, and as long as they're not being harmed, can have some very loving relationships.
So honesty and communication are things that you participate in a lot, so that your partner feels very loved.
Yeah, and awareness, because if I wasn't aware fully of exactly how I work and what I need, and then I wouldn't be able to communicate that in any way, shape or form, or understand it.
There was a point in your life where you were in prison. But actually, what sentence did you get in prison, and how much did you serve?
I've done 3 prison sentences, but the last one was for GBH. I got 18 months, served half, because you do half, and then half on probation in the UK. It's just standard. And
then you're working with someone, like a counsellor, or was it a counsellor you were working with in the prison, who she was quite open about her struggles and her background?
Yeah, that was actually in rehab after prison. So after prison, I went to a 6-month rehab centre, and a lot of counsellors, not a lot of them, but some of them get into counselling because they've had some experience with trauma or substance misuse, and they wanted them to turn that forward after. So she was one of those people that had lived that experience, and she connected with me on that level, and I was able to open up to her. Yeah,
most counsellors are trained to never self-disclose, so like, and I understand why people are trained in that way, because if you just start talking about yourself, you're taking the person's space. So I think it's really important to know when to self-disclose and when not to, and they make it a bit too black and white. They usually train therapists to just never self-disclose, and I think the harm in that is that it can often mean that the space is not safe enough to reveal things that could be usually quite shameful. So it seems like it worked for her to be open.
I needed that, like I personally hated it when they didn't tell me, because I would always ask questions and they would never answer my question. Because I had counselling in prison, I've had I had psychotherapy, I had all sorts of things. I got diagnosed again with another disorder, which was emotionally unstable personality disorder at the time, but apparently that's borderline.
Yeah, borderline.
But I don't think I have that. I think they just whacked another label on me or whatever.
It probably everything you've ever been diagnosed with, you no longer meet the criteria by a long shot. Because, I mean, even you couldn't be diagnosed as a psychopath right now today because you're not doing anything that would help you meet the criteria. So it's all of those labels you can throw in the bin.
That's good. But it's interesting because I do kind of still do some of the things on those, because it's not all behaviour. I mean, most of it isn't really behaviour. I mean, if you look at the, psychopathy, and some of the checklists, some of them are positive attributes. It's like, can you be charismatic?
I mean, it's quite helpful.
Why wouldn't they? I'm not gonna, so everyone, is gonna, if you're charismatic, you're one tick on the psychopath list. Are you intelligent? Is one of them. Well, tick. Yes, please. Can you be, like, one of them is manipulative? But I mean, what's the difference between manipulative and persuasive, really?
Yeah.
Can you be persuasive? Absolutely. I've learned to be. It's a really important part of negotiation and business. So that you very quickly realise that a lot of people can meet that criteria. And I have had a test recently, and to be a psychopath, you have to score 30 out of 40, and I scored 30. Yeah. So I still technically could be diagnosed with one. But what is a psychopath? Some guy, or woman, might have just created that theory at some point. We're all different people, and it's a mixture of brains, the some are vaguely similar to the point where they can get categorized, but we're all completely unique, aren't we?
Well, this is the problem with diagnosis, is like anyone can tick boxes, but if you're not combining it with a really sensible clinical interview from a pretty switched on practitioner, and actually it should be more than one practitioner, because I've seen a lot of misdiagnosis go on, and and also I'm not even blaming the practitioners, because I've seen people be diagnosed with autism and then they go for like further opinions, and then like it'll be like 3 practitioners are like yes autism, and then 2 practitioners are like absolutely not. And
I've had people DM me after the documentary like diagnosing me again. Just like psychotherapist or psychiatrist or whatever messaged me saying, I think you actually have autism. Honestly, there's been people that have told me about 4 people have said you're not psychopath, you're autistic.
It's so inappropriate for anyone to DM you and try and diagnose you, because you didn't ask for that, and you're not in a clinical setting asking for a diagnosis. So like, you are the only person who can really, be thinking of like, okay, what resonates the most. And
I had some counselling. I was probably very defensive anyway, to be honest, and it was hard to sort of crack that show open anyway. But I really didn't like it when they wouldn't disclose, because I felt like I couldn't connect with them or understand them in any way. And maybe that's part of, psychopathy or whatever, because I need some sort of intellectual knowledge to be able to bond and connect. Maybe there isn't this natural rapport that you could build with somebody. Maybe their warmth or body language wasn't enough for me, I don't know. But I felt like I needed information in order to be able to connect. And also I would hate it when I'd ask them a question and they wouldn't answer it. And they'd say, counselling is about you answer it. And I know what counselling is, but it doesn't mean to say you can't answer a question for me, or I can't at least hear your perspective of things. And I felt it was just very black and white, to the point where it just felt like they didn't care at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was the case, or, because it's just the way they've been trained, but that's how it made me feel at the time. I remember thinking like, these counsellors do not care about me.
Well, sadly, you're right, because when counsellors are trained, they're trained to fake empathy. I mean, we talked about manipulation, it's actually kind of manipulative, but they're trained to fake empathy, and there is no test to decide or see whether a therapist really has empathy or not. You learn to fake it. And then the people, you said a very good point earlier, that people enter the mental health space as a practitioner because they want to help themselves. Absolutely true. And sadly, in the industry, not that many people really do the work and help themselves. So then very few have true empathy, but they know how to fake empathy. but it's just saying words that help people feel understood. It's not actually really empathizing. And I think what happened when you met this lady who you did open up to, she really did feel empathy because she could understand what you've been through.
Yeah, she just said something like, point blank, Lewis, 8 years ago, I was a raging crack addict. And I was just like, whoa. You know, wow, that was a disclosure. But I also felt it as well.
Yeah.
Like it was real with her because she had experienced it. So she had that real empathy.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that you can't have empathy if you haven't experienced it, because you can also have that as well. But in this scenario, I could feel it from her. Whether or not that was an actual feeling or whether that was a thought, it's still hard to understand myself. But that rapport and that trust was there to the point where I was able to open up.
What did you tell her?
Well, she was probing about my dad, and I could feel stuff coming up, which is not usual at all for me, you know. It's not like I don't have any emotion. I have emotions, but they're shallow, and it takes something very extreme to really trigger it. So I don't cry much at all, you know. So I cry every decade or something, you know, and it would have to be something really significant. But anyway, she was triggering something. Emotion was coming up. I think for most people this probably happens during films and all sorts, but for me this was unusual, and she could sense it because, you know, throat was starting to go, you know, and stuff. And I'll tell you exactly what it was like. Have you seen the film Good Will Hunting with
Matt Damon?
Yeah, and what's his name? Robin Williams.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I've just lost words now. I have epilepsy and I have seizures, and it's just taken words from my brain. It's so irritating. But
Really?
just some words are just not there anymore. Just got to really fight to get them back.
How often do you have seizures?
Once every 6 months maybe, but then it just knocks my memory, and I lose a bit of memory and I lose some words, and it slowly comes back. But
what caused your epilepsy?
it was from the alcohol, I think. But yeah.
How when did you start having epilepsy?
I mean, when I really look back on it, it was probably as young as about 16, but I didn't know it. But sometimes you used to just wake up on the floor and never think anything of it.
Were you addicted to alcohol?
Yeah, I was an alcoholic, yeah.
Or would you
and
have
drug addict as well.
Would you have alcoholic fits?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I used to have a fit for like sometimes 20 minutes. One fit was so bad, I actually had cardiac arrest, stopped breathing, went blue, had to have CPR and brought back to life. You know.
So hard to imagine, you know, it's like seeing you sitting here now and it's very hard to imagine your past. What drugs were you addicted to?
Cocaine.
Yeah.
And mephedrone, not methadone. It was the
Meow
meow, you know. I didn't really talk much about that in the documentary because I never really wanted it to be this war story of how I used to take drugs and fight, and that had to be featured a bit. But to be honest, I really downplayed a lot of that because I didn't want to be, oh, look at this guy telling a story about all the crazy stuff he used to do and get up to, because that's not what that was supposed to be. But I was a really bad drug addict. Like I would do drugs for 3 or 4 days in a row without eating or sleeping a silly amount. I'd be literally sitting over a bin, vomiting, and then I would just, you know, go to sleep and then eat and then have a shower and then go and do it again.
What were the drugs giving you?
Stimulation, I think. I like a buzz. I was always on the upper drugs. And I think it was obviously gives you euphoria, makes you feel happy. So it fills that void.
Yeah.
You know, filling an internal problem with an external substance, they say, doesn't work, does it in the moment. But it also gave me that stimulation. And I think because I've never really felt much, whether it's because I've suppressed it, whether it's because I've, you know, been traumatized and I've learnt to cut it off, whether it's because I never learnt to nurture it in the first place, whether it's because I was born without them. Stimulation for me is important. That's why I like a business person now. It gives me stimulation, or I love coffee, or, you know, anything that can get my brain going. So drugs was a good outlet for that at the time. So
you'd come out of prison from your 3rd time in prison when you met this therapist.
Yeah.
And then all this emotion started coming up. Were you scared when you started to feel that emotion? Cause it was
I forgot to even mention that. Yeah, so yeah, it was like in that film where, so what was happening was I said don't go there, and again it was all unconscious kind of. There was no part of me saying don't go into my traumas, don't dig into my, because I didn't know what traumas were. I didn't even know it was there, but it was somehow surfacing, you know, don't, you know, stop. I didn't want that to come out. So I must have been scared of that. So this whole time I was probably scared of what was underneath all that, but I didn't know that. I didn't even think I should be in rehab. I didn't even think there was anything wrong with me, really. Kind of did, but kind of didn't. It was crazy sort of denial, weird stage. But I said, don't. And she said, you know, you can trust me. And then it just erupted. And then as the emotion erupted, so did words. And I just blurted out, why was he so horrible to me? Yeah, and I didn't even mean to say it, but it just came out. Yeah. And then I was just like, it was light bulb moment, a breakthrough moment. That's it. Why? And I realised I've been beating myself up for being this bad, unlovable kid, and that's why. I wanted to know why. Why did I deserve that kind of thing? And then since that moment, I've always known everything's always been centred around my dad from there on. Didn't know before. So it helped me get awareness around what the actual problem was. And I was in rehab for 6 months, and I was able to really deal with those issues, because when I went to rehab, I thought they were going to teach me how to not drink and not take drugs, but really that's nothing to do with what rehab's about. It's about learning to understand yourself so that you don't need the drink and drugs anymore in your life. And yeah, I cried massively, like really ugly tears and all, as you would say, and just felt so much lighter after that. It was one of my breakthroughs. I've had many, but that was one of them, the first one. So
you mentioned like suppressing a lot of emotions, not feeling a lot of emotion, but it sounds like you felt a lot of emotion when you were going through that process.
Yeah. I've had only 2 outbursts of emotion like that, cry-wise, from sort of breakthrough moments. Another one was really interesting, really, really interesting. So I was doing a breathwork session in Bali. I had been having it for a while, and I'd been edging into it. It's conscious connected breathwork. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Yeah.
And it's quite deep, to the point where you can start sort of going into a bit of an altered state and accessing sort of past memory. Sounds a little bit sort of woo-woo, but
yeah,
it really does.
It's quite psychedelic.
Yeah, it is, and it really did allow me to go into these memories that I'd suppressed. And I went back to this kind of, I saw this little boy, and I said, "What's the matter with you?" And he wouldn't look at me. I said, "What's the matter with you?" And I knew he's got some answers for me. It's like a creepy film. This little sad boy's got some answers that I need. There's basically the way I see breathwork is it allows you to act out a lot of your subconscious. So I, in visual form. So I was visually playing out this scenario of my subconscious and what I needed to access, but I was able to kind of manipulate that story as well at the same time. So I was going to this kid, and I didn't know it was me, but it was. So I was, "What's the matter with you?" And he eventually looked at me. I said, "What's the matter with you?" And then it zoomed out, and then I was at my granddad's retirement party, and then I remembered the whole memory. It just all came back like boom. I was there, and I just saw my 2 uncles beating my dad up, and I remember being on top of my uncles, ripping their hair out, trying to get them off my dad, and going, get off my dad," and just remember feeling the most powerlessness and fear and just hatred towards not being able to protect him, and just the shame as well of my dad being attacked like that, and my big strong dad has been treated like that. And when I remembered that during this breathwork session at the age of like 28 or something, again it just came straight out, and I just erupted with emotion from remembering that. And I actually think that could be where a lot of this started, from that memory, because that was way younger.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first, I'm bad and I'm unlovable and I'm kind of powerless, and I'm also angry, and and it's so weird how things play out, because I was having a coaching session. So when I went to prison for GBH, I was at a taxi queue, and some guy started shouting at me for jumping the queue, and I punched him, and he hit his head on the ground. He had a brain hemorrhage. But what was crazy, I was having a coaching session once, and they was talking about like things that had like affected me in my past. And I remembered this time I opened up my dad's computer, and I read a letter on there, and it was a police report that he'd filed of a time where a guy had hit him in a taxi queue. No. And I'd completely forgotten about it, but I remember reading it and being just like devastated again, because like just the thought of someone hitting my dad, and completely suppressing it and forgetting it, and then reenacting it like 20 years later in the same scenario without even any thought of how that could potentially or might not be connected. But anyway, some bizarre sort of breakthroughs I've had in my journey, where you start to sort of connect pieces and understand how some things can trigger you, or why I would act out so aggressively later on in life with these kind of childhood memories that were unsolved, or traumas that were unsolved.
It's a lot of empathy that you felt for your dad, considering you're supposed to be a psychopath.
I know, yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I think the psychopath is, when people think of a psychopath, they think of 100% cold, nothing. But as we've said, it's a spectrum. There's empaths that feel everything, that get consumed by other people's emotions, that can't even, hear someone's story without crying and being consumed by it for the next 4 days after, or whatever. And then there's psychopaths that would, cut your head off and not even think twice. So I'm not going to cut your head off, but I'm also not going to be consumed by your story for 4 days. So I've got feelings.
Some people are not empaths until they feel their own feelings, and then that's where they become able to be empaths and feel compassion. So when did you decide to change on a conscious level?
So I got sentenced to prison, and I rang up my friend and I said, what are people saying about me? And they said, you're on the front page of the newspaper, blah, blah. I said, okay. And they said, also, your friends posted a picture of you outside the courtroom. There's a picture of you outside the courtroom the day you was sentenced, and a picture of you outside the exact same courtroom 7 years before with the caption above, nothing changes. And when he told me that, weirdly, that was like the first breakthrough I'd ever had, because it just sort of hit me, oh, actually nothing has changed in those 7 years. And I realised, it's so basic and so sort of cliche, but I realised that I was doing the same things over and over again, expecting a different result. You've heard that expression, right? And I was blaming everything and everyone around me for why my life was difficult, but I was never looking at myself. And I was sometimes making changes, but only to things around me, but never at myself. And didn't think I could change because I didn't think I was changeable. You know, I had this identity. I didn't even believe in change, didn't understand change. I thought you was a certain way and you develop a personality and that's kind of you. My mum even said to me, oh, Lewis, we all know you're not going to make old bones. She'd kind of even decided that you're probably going to die young. You know, so this is how much that it enforced this belief in me that I couldn't change. But for some reason, when I saw that nothing changes, it was almost a bit of me being a bit stubborn about it. Like, how dare you tell me nothing changes? Maybe I can, you know. And I went to my prison cell, as cliche as it sounds, and I looked at myself in the mirror, which is a little scratched off piece of metal. And I say the word cliche a lot because I just want to emphasize the fact that I know it sounds like a story, like I've made up, but it's genuinely the truth. And I just looked at myself in the mirror, but it was the first time I'd really actually looked at myself properly and realized that I was the problem, or wanted to take responsibility for myself. I think saying I was the problem is, you know, obviously not probably the best way to put it, but I had created these things in my life. Regardless of what had happened, I was still creating this in my life, and nothing had changed in those 7 years, for example, between that courtroom. And if I was the problem, but I was also the solution. And I just made a decision right there and then. I just said, I'm going to change myself. For the first time, I'm going to change myself. And I've always been obsessive and compulsive, and I've been addicted and to everything you can imagine. So luckily, that obsessive part of me got attached to the idea of changing myself, and I got all wrapped up in fantasy. First of all, was I'm going to change my name, I'm going to move abroad. And well, really, I did actually end up doing all those things. I mean, that fantasy became a reality, to be honest, because I now use Lewis Raymond Taylor. My name is actually Lewis Taylor, but I put the Raymond in because it feels different, it sounds different, it's entirely different name. It's actually my dad's name, which is weird. It is actually my middle name. But anyway, so my name's different. I did change my name technically, just similar. Did move, but I got wrapped up in this fantasy of I'm just absolutely going to immerse myself and become a completely different person. And I just started and haven't stopped nearly 10 years later.
You clearly have a ridiculous amount of grit, because you become wildly successful in a really short space of time. So tell me about how hard you work.
Yeah, I'm a workaholic. Yeah.
Do you think that some of the stuff that you were channeling into negative energy, you've now just switched it and you're like, I can do, because you were a drug dealer as well, which essentially is a type of business, just not a legal one. And you were probably quite good at that, apart from you were in self-destruct mode and you're also addicted to drugs, which means you're not going to operate your illegal business very well. But do you think you just switched it and you still have like some of the same personality traits? You're just using them
100%. Like it was only so much I could put in the documentary, but I even started a business when I was 18 years old. I bought a bouncy castle and I started renting it out and making money. And I also hired sumo wrestling. I bought sumo wrestling suits and started renting those out for kids' parties. And I also at one point got a job when I was 16 years old in telesales. Actually, I was 15 years old. They gave me a flyer in the middle of the street and said, do you want a job? I said, all right. I went in the call centre and started picking up the phones and doing well. And then at the end, they said, what's your national insurance number? I said, oh, I don't have one. I said, oh. I said, okay, I'll come back when I'm 16. So I came back when I was 16 and did that job, and I was top salesperson. Not all the time, but regularly, and did well. And a couple of years, then I started selling drugs and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But then I went back to the old boss and I said, how much do you get for those deals? And I brokered a deal with him and opened up my own office and started getting people working for me on commission only, like some of my lads from around the estate, like selling business phone lines. So I was always entrepreneurial. I should have put that in the documentary really, but there's only so many layers to it, I couldn't really put it all in, to be honest.
And there was some criticism. So the criticism was that it's a cult, and then also the criticism was that there wasn't very much compassion for the way that you fire people from the organization or
Yeah.
or remove people from the organization. So if someone is not of the right caliber, which quite understandably happens a lot in business, sometimes you know cannot keep someone involved because it's just not working out, the energy isn't right, or they're quite toxic. What's your way of removing someone? How do you do that? And do you do that like super fast? Is
Yeah.
there, have you received criticism in relation to how you did?
I'm only ever gonna kick someone out of the community if they need to be kicked out. You know, one drop of poison still spoils the broth. I don't want that drop of poison in. The whole way I've been able to build a community is because it's a positive group of people. And if you let negative people in, it's no longer positive and it just becomes a group of people. So I have to protect that. And I have a duty as a leader to protect, you know, the energy and the well-being of the people that deserve to be there. And if someone doesn't meet that criteria, there is the ruthless. I mean, it's just they're getting kicked out of a group. I mean, they still have their life and their children, and they're fucking. It's not like I'm putting them in jail or something. You know?
Do you have a conversation with them though to
No.
kind of it's just like straight away they're gone?
Someone else will do it. I'm a CEO. You know, they've got 8,000 customers. I couldn't care less. If you've fucked up and you haven't abided by our set of rules that we've laid out, and these are positive rules that they've agreed to, then I mean, this is how society functions anyway. You know,
Let
if
me
you
change
break a
the
law,
question. Does someone on your team have a conversation?
there'll be a message that says you violated the community rules and because of this, and as a result, you're no longer in it.
So tell me about the
And the cult thing you wanted to
Yeah, the
address.
cult,
as well.
yes.
The cult thing as well. It's like people just don't know what a cult is, and it's a very vague thing. It has cult-like characteristics because it's a community. There's a leader. There's people with the same opinion, but it's all for good things. You know, it's we're trying to help people. We're going out there becoming coaches, making the world a better place. So it's a culture. You know, that's what we say, a culture. But to be an actual cult, I think it has to have religious elements. I think there needs to be, I don't know, donations or maybe even sexual things and partners and all sorts. But yeah, I mean, there's an element of the brainwashing thing there, I guess, because I mean, if I'm being criticised for brainwashing you and believing in yourself and thinking that anything is possible, then I'm guilty. So there are some elements there that could be conceived as a cult, and I don't mind people saying it's a cult. Look, If you want to call me a cult leader, I'll be a cult leader. It doesn't really matter what people's perspective is of me, or what a cult is. I think they need to do some research on what cults actually are, and then they'll know. But really, it's just a group of people that I'm actually not even that present in, to be honest, anymore. I've taken the role as a CEO. I'm not that involved. We have a whole team of trainers and facilitators that are way more active and present than I am. So it's not like I glorify myself and ask anybody to do anything. I'm just a trainer that trains coaches and has a team of people around me. Then we have an ethos that I created that is now sort of distilled through the company, which is just a normal part of leadership and business. And these people are just jealous, and they're specifically jealous if they get kicked out.
I agree. So you were incredibly successful at helping other people change their lives. In fact, you got the results way faster than typical therapists would, because talking therapy can be quite slow at times. So tell me, why do you think you were so good at helping people change?
I think the lack of emotional influence allowed me to ask tough questions and go to uncomfortable places. And also, because I lack in emotion, I think I benefit intellectually. So I think if you're blind, then you'll hear better. If you can't hear, you'll see better. And I think that my brain works very methodically and sequentially and strategically. Like, I can see it all mapped out. So if I'm having a conversation with somebody, everything they say, I can kind of see it out in pieces. And if I want to get over here, I know if I need to ask this question to get to there, to get to here, to get to there. And it's almost like a bit of a calculation and a bit of I can't really explain it. It's just the way my brain works. But it's that combined with really listening and understanding and having been to a lot of those places as well. It's like they'll explain something and I'll be like, yeah, I remember that. And if it's not something I've been through, it's something I've heard in, say, an AA meeting or an NA meeting or a rehab or, So real life experience is a massive advantage, of course, because I can kind of remember how I felt or thought and how I got out of that or what was useful. I've never been a purist coach as well, so I use any tool, technique, model, framework, unconventional, conventional I need to do to help somebody. So, you would obviously massively disagree with that being an actual professional, which maybe I'm not, but, there's a lot of people going off the guidelines of what they're told to do rather than intuitively what they believe they need to do or what is just the best scenario for this person. So I'm just going in there with, if I need to crack a joke right now, or if I need to sing and clap and dance, which I don't, but I'll do it. And I think a combination of having the experience, being prepared to ask the tough questions, having a logical brain to the point where you're able to sort of channel and access the things that you need to access, and being comfortable enough to sort of defy maybe traditional sets of standards of what you're being told could be a good thing to do, and just go with what you know to be good for the person to do. I think wrapping all that up worked for me.
A lot of intuition.
I guess so. Or a logical, because with intuition it's kind of interesting. I've never really understood whether it's intuition or whether it's intellect, because it can be kind of similar. And intuition I kind of see as this gut feeling of, this is what I think makes sense, and I don't really know where it's coming from. That can also happen in your brain, I think, as well, subconsciously, where you're kind of piecing things together and you don't really know where you're getting it from, but you are, it's like, I think I need to go here, but it's probably because I heard that woman explain it in this AA meeting, and I remember reading this one piece of chapter from this book here, and that thing she mentioned at the beginning of the call with her mum, my gut or my subconscious is telling me, so I don't know, quite know if it's intuition or not, but mixture of the two maybe.
Yeah, well, it's a good mind-body connection.
Yeah.
Are you happy?
That's an interesting question. Happiness isn't something, I don't really know what that is, to be honest. That's truth. That's a truthful answer. Happiness, probably not, but I'm not unhappy. Stimulated, satisfied and excited. It's different. Fulfillment and happiness is something that feels quite dull to me. It's one of these emotions that I can't quite grasp fully. It's there, but it's just not so strong. But I can feel stimulated and excited, and those things probably similar to what you would have or someone else would have as happiness.
Well, I mean, that's an assumption about me.
Yeah, that's what, when I say you, I'm just making a general, I'm talking to the people watching. Are you happy?
Happiness is short-lived. Like, some of the time I'm really happy, really, really happy, because I've delved into the darker emotions, and it doesn't last for like a very long period of time, but I really appreciate it when I feel it. And then other times I'm stimulated and excited about things I'm working on. You have to keep topping up happiness. It's hard work. What's next for you, Lewis?
I'm still, building this business, building the empire. I've got big goals to make this much bigger than it is, much more widespread, global, mainstream scale. There was obviously the alluding to the end, the Hollywood acting thing. It's more of a the passion I had as a kid, because I used to do the acting, the singing, and the dancing, until the sexual abuse thing. So that's more of a thing for fun. Potentially could lead to some fulfillment and happiness. Who knows? We'll find out. And also, continuing to become a dad and broadening my emotional capacity with that, continuing to learn about myself more. But build a family, become more successful, and become a star.
What's life like as a dad, considering you didn't have the parenting that you could have benefited from? How have you decided to parent as a result of your upbringing?
Well, I'm not going to do it how I had it, that's for sure. So it's so early days at the moment. It's hard to tell, because obviously 3-month-old, it's there's not really much parenting going on, but I'm showing him a lot of love, supporting him, taking a lot of the lead from Diana, because she is very, very emotional and caring, nurturing and motherly. So it's definitely good to let her take the lead on that, and just letting it unfold, and seeing how I'm just looking forward to the emotional connection and bonding strengthening. Like, I feel myself loving him more and more every day, and that's a really nice process to go into, especially after everything I've said today and my whole history. So I'm hoping he's the one that unlocks all this for me,
Amazing. What's the final message that you want to give to particularly young males who find themselves getting involved in crime, where they might also have the identity of feeling that they're bad, when actually it is just a result of messages they've picked up when growing up? Yeah,
whether it's a result of messages you picked up, or whether it's things that have happened to you, or whether it's things you've done. It may not be a case of trauma. You might have made some mistakes or got involved with the wrong circles or whatever. That might not have left you, and this might be still way into your life. We're not talking about young men. This could be still men later on in life that are still holding on to these behaviors. Just understand that it's things you've done, not who you are. That's very, very, very different. Your behavior is very different to your identity. behavior is something that's in the past, it's gone, it's forgotten about. Your identity is who you are, and that can be changed. And if you understand it can be changed and you believe that it can be changed, then you have the ability to adopt any identity or persona you want, and not in a manipulative kind of mask-like way, but in, you know, defining who is the ideal version of yourself and slowly growing towards that, and knowing that you won't be judged and your past doesn't define you. What I find mind-blowing even to this day is I get nothing but praise for turning my life around, when really I shouldn't have really done a lot of those things in the first place. So a lot of people will be thinking, yeah, but I'm never going to be able to get ahead in life because I've got a criminal record, or I've done all these things, or I've got all this judgment, or all these people think about this of me, or that is just going to be, you know, yesterday's news, and you've got the opportunity to reinvent yourself and become anybody you want. And I can speak from experience that absolutely is the case. So don't let it hold you back.
That's amazing, Lewis. It's so inspiring to anyone who's been labelled, particularly with a serious personality disorder, that actually your identity can shape throughout the whole course of your life. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you're 40 years old, you still have influence over your identity, particularly in a world where identity is so confusing for young people, where there's all this stuff happening with gender, and that actually people can take control over their identity. I mean, it helps to have a bit of the right support, and sadly not everyone has that. But I think people often think identity is more static than it really is, particularly if they've been labelled with a personality disorder.
One last thing before we wrack up. So what is your opinion of me from if you could summarize it from this conversation or from watching the documentary, like if you could sort of psychoanalyze me in a minute, what's your opinion of the psychopath thing?
I just think you're a normal guy.
Okay.
Completely normal guy. Like, I mean, a lot of I haven't had the perfect upbringing, and it has not been as bad as yours, but like, I have been through difficult things in my childhood. So like the whole, you know, decision about identity and figuring out who I was, like I could easily have gone down the wrong path. I can completely see how your parents were not able to help you shape the identity that helped you develop really strong and solid core beliefs. And, you know, you mentioned this kind of thing about like people saying you have autism or, you know, anything like that. It's just trauma, that any amount of emotions that you've suppressed and, you know, and don't really connect with on a very deep level. I mean, clearly from breathwork and stuff, you've connected very deeply with your emotions. So I think everything you've experienced is just upbringing. Of course, we have like genetic elements that, you know, help, you know, that do influence our personality. But the fact that you clearly have spelt out how your identity was developed in a way that led you to do bad things, and then you switched it around, all seems quite, you know, an explanation of what you've been through. And I think the innate things in you are probably the grit and like the energy and the fact that you will wake up and get stuff done, you know, like I don't think that you were born bad in any shape or form. And we can all learn to manipulate. It's survival. Like if you grow up in an environment where it's not effective to ask for things directly, and you try to ask for something directly and you get shut down, you get punished, you know, you learn thinking outside of the box strategies, which of course can be very manipulative strategies if you start doing really bad things. And, you know, so your story is like that of just someone who hasn't been given the most ideal upbringing. Yeah, maybe it's stunted you emotionally in some ways, but if you look at society, like we're all kind of emotionally stunted.
Yeah, that's
like,
true, yeah.
Like no one's had the perfect upbringing. Of course, some people better than others. And I think the noteworthy thing is your willingness to change. And also I think what's so fascinating is most people who've been called a psychopath isn't able to give me the story of what shaped their identity and how they changed it around. So I think the most inspirational thing about you is that you're actually telling people, this is exactly how my identity was formed in the wrong way, and actually I was just given enough support to be able to switch it around and to feel much better about yourself, and you no longer do anything that is making you look like a psychopath. Of course, you've received some criticism and people, you know, are calling you a cult leader, but I think I could easily say that about my business, which is also a business that's just trying to help people. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and unfortunately, if we get someone toxic involved, like we do have to fire them, because you can't carry on with people who are, as you've said, like not operating correctly. So that's my opinion.
Good. So you relate a little bit then.
A little bit. I didn't go as extreme as you.
So you're the psycho as well. Got it.
Yeah, I could have been a psychopath also, but chose not to.
The psychopath therapist is coming out next week. Got it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much, Lewis. I really enjoyed it.
No problem. Thank you.